I don't want to criticize the Ayatollah because too many constituents in Michigan are devastated that he's dead. So that's something that I think is much more concerning. I'd stay silent
until that candidate in Michigan is commander-in-chief and actually can do something about the war. I'm going to give what Trump says and what the people around him say more important.
I would like to.
In this video, Anna Navarro appeared as a guest on Abby Phillip's show on CNN, where she pushed back against what she described as the MAGA narrative, including claims she called misleading, false, and driven by propaganda. And we are going to look at clips from that panel discussion, which featured Navarro along with MAGA supporter Lydia Moynihan and others. And I'll also share my own thoughts. So let's watch into it together.
Number one, the destruction of their Air Force. Number two, the destruction of their Navy. Number three, the severe diminishing of their missile launching capability. And number four, the destruction of their factories so they can't make more missiles and more drones to threaten us in the future. All of this so that they can never hide behind it to acquire a nuclear weapon. The Iranian regime can never have nuclear weapons, and they need to stop sponsoring terrorism, and they need to stop building weapons that can threaten their neighbors.
All right, so he started off in the morning with 4 things that were crystal clear, reasonable, but they didn't include the nuclear issue, which is at the core here. And then he added 3 more. So now it's really 7. And I think it's a real question. Are they going to be able to achieve all of those objectives in this military operation that we're engaged in?
Yeah, well, I mean, I only heard 3, really. I mean, the 3 basic ones. I mean, the nuclear one is the reason.
The second set of comments.
Right. I mean, I think the nuclear issue is the big one that everyone has been focused on, from President Obama to, all U.S. presidents since Iran's covert program was exposed in 2002. The United States and the West have been extraordinarily patient in negotiating with Iran, and Iran has managed to do an end run around the U.S. Over and over again. And so it came to a point, I think, that after October 7th, what happened was that was the trigger. October 7th, 2023, the rules of the game changed in the Middle East in 2 key ways. One, the costs of President Obama's approach of just focusing on the nuclear element, the costs of doing that was exposed because the proxies had been so empowered during that period. The ballistic missiles were so expanded that it reached a point where we were seeing a time where the Iranian regime could create a ballistic missile shield behind which they could build a nuclear weapon. And by the way, the second thing I'd say is just that the Iranian officials, for the first time, said after the June war, we should go for a nuclear weapon.
But what's important here, though, is what is the resolution to this problem? We understand the problem set, but the resolution is either negotiation, it's a deal, okay, at the negotiation table, or it's to forcibly remove the nuclear material.
And it's
the forcibly removing of the nuclear material is something that would require ground troops, which is deeply unpopular.
That's it. How much patience does the American public have for the operation? How much pain are they willing to endure economically? How many soldiers are they willing to see come back in caskets draped with flags? And that is a real thing. And the idea, so a lot of those things that we always talk about can be accomplished with an air campaign. You can destroy Navy, you can destroy
first set of
3. You can do that for the air campaign. Nobody can match the U.S. As a military muscle. Problem is the idea of going to retrieve the nuclear material. That's a whole other ballgame, much longer a horizon. And is the American public interested in being involved in that with that many troops on the ground for that long a period of time?
Well, on that topic, I mean, there is a rift that is widening among some Republicans over this war in Iran, with some of the president's once loyal followers pushing back now on this. Listen.
Literally, we're 4 weeks into this war, and this is the first we've heard about, we're going to go in and just get the uranium. Like, that is new. It changed from, oh no, it's about the missiles. We got to get rid of those missiles. Okay, Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. That was stated broadly. We got to do regime change because the Ayatollah is bad. It just keeps moving.
And then there's Senator Lindsey Graham. He's one of the most hawkish figures in President Trump's orbit. And he called on Trump in a post this morning to wind down. Yes, you read that right. Wind down the war and wind up efforts for a peace deal. Graham added that he supports diplomatic efforts, but he said that an agreement from both sides is needed to resolve this conflict. So, Lydia, I mean, what is going on here? I mean, obviously, look, I always have to caveat this. MAGA is behind the president, but there are some people who are worried about where this is heading. Megyn Kelly is one of them, but Lindsey Graham saying,
well, he went to Disney World this weekend, and I think he wants to bring some of that Disney magic back to Washington, D.C., clearly. Look, I think one thing that's always been a hallmark of the right is ideological diversity. And I think it's good for conservatives to push back and make sure that President Trump is not in an echo chamber and that he's hearing what many in his base think. And so I'm glad to hear that articulated. I think what's more troubling to me than a podcaster saying, should we be pushing for regime change, is the fact that you have Democratic candidates, a Democratic candidate in Michigan who basically in a leaked tape today said, I don't want to criticize the Ayatollah because too many constituents in Michigan are devastated that he's dead. So that's something that I think is much more concerning than Megyn Kelly.
Democratic candidate.
Yes, El Sayed for Michigan. Said there are a lot of people in Dearborn who are sad about his death.
Because they're sad.
I would much rather see a party have a debate and stay silent.
Until that candidate in Michigan is commander-in-chief and actually can do something about the war, I'm going to give what Trump says and what the people around him say more important.
I would like to see Ayatollah roundly condemned. I think that's something we should all agree on as Americans.
No, nobody's ever not condemned the Ayatollah.
But on the question of what the president of the United States
but the problem is that
we're talking about here.
Trump right now does live in an echo chamber surrounded by his cabinet members, right? This would probably be a very different situation if it was the Trump cabinet from the first administration that you were part of. If there was a Mike Pence there, if there was a Jim Mattis there, if there was a John Kelly there.
And I think that was pretty hawkish.
That was part of the reason. That was part of the reason why he put people like Pete Hegseth in there, why he put people like Pam Bondi and like Marco Rubio in there, because the quality he was looking for was absolute loyalty, and they're showing it.
That is a strong point from Ana Navarro, and it is something I was already thinking about going into a potential second term of Donald Trump. This idea that he would now be surrounded by people who simply agree with everything he says and follow without question, whereas in his first term there were individuals who were deeply conservative, some even aggressive in their policies, but they were not completely blind followers and not entirely detached from reality. They at least presented themselves as people who could act as a moderating influence on Trump. Whether that was true or not is another debate, but the key point is they were not just outright clowns like Pete Hegseth, and they had reasons to push back, whether to protect their reputations, their careers, or avoid serious consequences for their decisions. And as Navarro points out here, that kind of presence seems to be missing now, which is partly why everything feels so chaotic and reckless, and why we are seeing more extreme outcomes, because there is no one willing to challenge Trump. He is essentially surrounded by yes men. And then you have Lydia Moynihan doing what MAGA voices often do, shifting the focus by saying, what about the Democrats? Bringing up some obscure or low-level Democrat that most people have never even heard of, claiming they said something extreme like people being devastated about the Ayatollah. And as Navarro rightly pushes back, there is no real evidence of that being a mainstream view, and this tactic is very common, where random and unverified examples are used to generalize an entire side, something many people experience even in their personal lives when discussions turn political. But there is a clear difference between an unknown individual and the sitting president of the United States, which is exactly the distinction Navarro highlights. And when Charles Blow brings up the American public and their willingness to support a ground war, it is hard to see much support at all, especially when early indicators already show a large majority of Americans opposing the conflict even in its initial phase. And if the situation escalates further into a full ground war, that opposition is only likely to grow even stronger against Trump.
The president is hearing this concern. Conservatives and some of the people that he used to cross over, right? So not just MAGA, but the people like the Joe Rogans who helped him get to the sort of the MAGA bros and the people in the middle who are worried that he's breaking promises, worried that he's slipping into a conflict that could necessitate American troops on the ground in Iran.
Sure, he's hearing it. I think he follows it pretty closely. I think he's always following. I think he's beta testing messages constantly. But as I started, Abby, I think that the professor makes a great point about October 7th, because for Israel, that has become an existential threat. And for Israel, it's hard for them to find a better partner than President Trump in this campaign. What I think that the administration has failed to do is to give clear messaging. The messaging has continued to diverge on different reasons for why we're engaged here and what the ultimate objective is. They would do well to explain that to the American people. I think that, again, Iran has posed a threat for 47 years. They've slaughtered many of Westerners. They've created an existential threat for our partner in Israel. and they are trying to develop nuclear weapons. There's a rationale for this, but it has to be explained to American people. Here's what we're trying to accomplish.
Do you think that our objectives are the same as the Israeli government's objectives?
I think that the Israeli has been more clear that they want regime change. I think they're mostly aligned.
Mark,
It's clear they want to go far.
the reason the messaging has been so muddled is because the things that Donald Trump thought were initially going to happen did not pan out, right? He thought that the Iranian people would take to the streets. He told them, this is about your destiny, about your freedom, about regime change. When he saw that didn't happen, he's had to change and move the goalposts.
I don't question that. I think Israel intelligence suggested to them that the revolution would come faster.
Yes.
But I still think that even still, it would merit them to say, here's what we're trying to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
We'll probably never fully understand how much influence Israel had in this war, whether Donald Trump was pushed into it, pressured into it, or if this was something he genuinely wanted because of his own aggressive instincts. And my feeling is that instead of forcing him or cornering him, Benjamin Netanyahu likely took a different approach by appealing to his ego and telling him he could go down in history as a great president, unlike those who came before him, like Joe Biden, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush, suggesting they didn't have the courage that he supposedly has. And it feels similar to the way Vladimir Putin is often said to deal with Trump, by feeding into his need for praise rather than confronting him, because pushing him too hard would only make him more stubborn, while flattery clearly works on him. So when people talk about Israeli influence or what voices like Ana Navarro are saying, it's hard to know exactly what role that played, but it seems just as likely that Trump moved forward because he believed it would be easy based on past situations like Venezuela, and because he has this idea that great presidents are defined by the wars they win, almost like he wants to recreate the image of a World War II-era leader who gains victories and expands power. But the reality we're seeing now is that he miscalculated badly, and it's not just the United States dealing with the fallout, but multiple countries feeling the consequences, especially after he openly suggested that allies should go secure their own oil from the Strait of Hormuz, which means those countries may start making their own deals with Iran and possibly move away from the US dollar toward other currencies. And that shift alone could have serious global impact. So when it comes to the debate involving Ana Navarro going up against other voices on shows like those hosted by Abby Phillip, the bigger question is whether you agree with Navarro's perspective or align more with the MAGA viewpoint. And honestly, this is one of those debates where opinions are deeply divided. So I want to know where you stand on this entire discussion. Let me know what you think about in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe for more.